View from the Gutters presents The Long Run, Episode 1. The Long Run is a show where we discuss runs of comics longer than a single trade or graphic novel. Warning, this show contains massive spoilers. Please read the run before listening to the episode. Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of The Long Run.
View from the Gutters
presents
The Long Run.
This is The Long Run.
Episode 1.
Long
Extra
run,
long.
Extra long and extra.
The longest.
Extra.
Starring Burt Reynolds, The Longest Run.
the longest run. This is a thing. No, so this is a special. We've decided to. Many times we make reference to series or runs on a book that would be difficult to talk about in the context of a normal podcast. So we wanted to set aside some time every once in a while where we could talk about these great series that have and runs that have really affected us as readers, and we think that you should read. So, and in that spirit, we've decided with probably what is my favorite thing to read.
Inaugural episode.
Yeah.
Transmetropolitan.
Transmetropolitan by
Warren Ellis and Derek Robertson.
Created by Warren Ellis and Derek Robertson. I think
and, featuring Rodney Ramos.
Rodney Ramos does inks for most of it, I believe. It comprises 10 trades, and I think somewhere right in the area of like 75...
60 issues.
60 issues, okay.
Yeah, and this originally came out in 2001 under the Helix imprint by DC, now defunct.
Mm-hmm. Now defunct. Not to be confused with Defunk by Daft Punk.
Before, and then it moved to DC, and then it moved to
Vertigo. I think so. It might have gone straight from Helix to Vertigo, but...
No, it was published by DC for a while.
Okay, I'd have to check my individual issues and look at the covers.
Yeah, and this is a mature reader's title, too, just to let you know that there's a lot of sex and violence... Bloody violence, swearing.
Well, if you're listening to this, you
probably
should have already read it because
if you haven't,
we're going to spoil the fuck out of this.
If you haven't stopped now.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, you really don't want to be spoiled on this one. So pause the podcast, go and read all 10 volumes, and then come back and unpause it. We'll wait for you.
Yeah. All right, yeah.
Welcome back to View from the Gutters.
I'm your host, Tobiah Panshin.
We killed Chard while you weren't. No, we didn't.
What? No, I'm still here. I'm Andrew
Chard.
Chard.
Right there. He's Andrew Chard.
Are you Joe Preti?
I am Joe Preti.
Or are you going to be...
Do we have to take away your Joe Preti privileges again?
Give me another one of your
alter egos. I'm Mo Freddy.
Mo.
You'll never guess.
I'm Cade Reynolds.
Cade will have his usual...
Yeah,
his usual MO.
Cade. Although he just returned to us from Florida, so it's entirely possible that he is just an incredibly detailed Android copy of Cade. We really can't. We have no way.
We'll never know. The world will never know.
You can't get that kind of engineering in Florida.
Maybe. So,
I don't know. I was next to NASA.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not the good NASA.
I mean, how do we know?
The good NASA's in Houston, right?
It was gone for like 2 weeks. He kind of been kidnapped.
I'm pretty sure they moved the good NASA to outer space.
Where's the JPL?
That's right next to the JLA, isn't it?
It's in space next to the Watchtower. Right? Didn't they move to Mars?
I
read something about Mars recently.
I can't remember.
I don't know.
This is not important, though. What is important is that he's Tobiah Panshin.
I am Tobiah Panshin, and I shall continue to be so for the foreseeable future.
What was your name again? Was it Mo?
It was
Mo Frank
Bo Creddy.
God.
Transmetropolitan. Transmetropolitan is. I have a story about Transmetropolitan. I collected comics from the time I was about 15, and for like 4 or 5 years when I was from about 13 or 14 till about 18, and I had my collection was like the love of my life. And when I went away to college, and I left somebody in my apartment, somebody who was, because I lived in school-sponsored housing, so I wasn't allowed to have people that weren't students living with me, but I was letting a guy stay with me because he'd gotten kicked out. And they threw him out while I was gone on vacation, and he, stole a bunch of my shit. And one of the things he stole was my comic collection, so after that I kind of wrote comics off. Years later, I'd moved to California, and I went to a comic shop just to see kind of what was going on. Of course, I had no idea. But I saw this comic on the shelf called Transmetropolitan. I was like, oh, that looks fucking retarded, right? Like, who the fuck would read that? Flash forward even more years, I moved to Olympia. I go into a comic shop. I go, hey, I haven't read comics in about 12, 13 years. What should I read? She goes, you should go read this comic book called Transmetropolitan. And I picked it up, and within 3 days, I had bought all of them and read them, and I was already reading them for a second time because it was so good. And this time reading it was probably a time 8 or 9 for me, and it continues to be amazing. In fact, it gets better. It gets better every time I read it.
It really does. I've been trying to think while you've been talking about when I first read it, and honestly, I could not remember. And I think it was when I was in college and I met Brandt, who's previously been on the podcast and is sadly no longer with us. On the podcast.
On the podcast.
He's not dead. He's just not on the podcast.
We hung out with him last night.
But I know for a fact that he had all of these. So that actually probably had to have been probably 2003 or 2004 because the series was completed at that point because he had all the volumes. And I borrowed the first one from him, and I think I ended up reading the entire thing within about 2 or 3 days.
Yeah,
it's very, very hard to put this series down once you've started it.
I read it for the first time yesterday, and it's not actually my first attempt at reading it. I've attempted to read it before this. It just never really grabbed me right out of the gate. And reading it this time, I was glad that I just kind of plowed through it all in one sitting because, 2 sittings. I read some of it today as well. But yeah, I think it takes a little time for you to kind of adjust to the world that's happening. And the quicker you adjust to it, everybody's going to have a little bit of a different adjustment time. But for me, it took, I think, probably until the 3rd trade before I was really ready to accept everything that was going on.
Yeah, I
fully
actually loaned this to my boss earlier this year, and he said after the first volume or the first volume and a half, I was going to put this down because it didn't grab me, and I kept reading because I respect your taste and I know that you really appreciate this. And it wasn't until the end of the 2nd volume that it really grabbed me. Yeah. And I think really the first 2 volumes are prelude. They're set up. They're getting you adjusted to the world. And the series really starts with volume 3.
Yeah. With the first, when the lady that he likes that works, Ava, right? Is
Vita.
Vita.
Vita Severn.
When she gets shot, that's when it got me. It took all the way up until then, which I think is the end of the 3rd trade.
Yeah,
I think it's something like that.
Yeah.
So
I've read that scene literally 9 or 10 times. That's not a surprise for me, and I still get chills every time it happens.
Yeah,
because right after that part is book 4, where it's basically the journalistic equivalent of a revenge flick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think at that point is the turning point. I think that one of the reasons Transmet is so good is because Spider Jerusalem is in some ways very much he's an anti-hero, but he's also his story is told in this way that is very familiar to people that read a lot of superhero comics. You're introduced to this guy, you have no idea what he does, what he's about, and he immediately starts doing this really fucking insane shit. But he gets away with it because he is who he has this tremendous amount of just fucking forceful will behind him. He's not just a man. He's an act of nature.
I'm not sure if I would classify Spider Jerusalem as an anti-hero because I don't know something. From my perspective, I've always thought of anti-heroes as kind of these grim, brooding, foreboding characters who are not heroic in that they're not doing what they do for good reasons. They're not trying to help people. They're not trying to save things. They're out for revenge, or, you know, they have, like, very dark motives. You know, the Punisher is an anti-hero. He doesn't care about, like, saving the day or making the world a better place. He just wants to kill every gangster who's ever lived.
Well, yeah.
And Spider Jerusalem, in his heart of hearts, is a good person. And it takes a long time for you to really uncover that fully.
Right.
Because it's not on the surface.
And at the beginning, too, it reminds me a lot of the beginning of, like, Lord of the Rings, where you have to wade through, like, a lot of setup before the adventure really begins. Like, there's that whole part where they're, like, wandering through the woods with Tom Bombadil for, like, a million years.
It took me 3 times reading it to get past the first 100 pages of the Fellowship of the Ring, because they're in the fucking Shire, and some months go by, and he moves to Brelin, and then he's hanging out, and some people come to visit him, and then they go to the fucking woods, and they're wandering around. It's fucking interminable. It takes so long to get set up and to get to the point where the author has, like, forward momentum for the first time, and I felt like that in Transmet. When you're first introduced to Spider, he's living in the mountains. His purpose is I'm cut off from society. This is what I want to be doing. He's doing what he wants to be doing at the beginning of the book. And then he has to go make money because he's out of money, and he needs to go fulfill his contract of writing the book. So he moves back to the city. And he doesn't really give a shit about what he's writing at the beginning. You know, like, there's subjects that he cares about, but he's not writing about them with the intensity that he will write about things later in the series. He's just kind of telling these stories. And it takes that moment, I think, of watching someone he likes get killed, the corruption in the system be exposed to him, like, in a horrible way. I don't even think it's somebody that he likes. It's somebody that he respects as being honest. Like, when he meets Vita, it really gives him hope that maybe the Smiler isn't just another bastard. Like, maybe there really is the potential for things to get better.
Right.
And when she dies, when she's executed, assassinated even, like, that's, for him, that's hope dying. That's reaffirmation of every negative suspicion that he has about society.
He did have a crush on her, though.
That's true. He did.
He did, but
I think there's more to it.
I think the bigger thing that's going on there, though, and you see this leading up to it, because I'm pretty sure before that whole thing happens, he goes through the oncology farmers tracking him down, and they lock him out of his apartment, and they get rid of his insurance, his, like, journalism insurance, and that whole thing happens. The thing that really gets me about that, after reading it so much, is it's not just that he sees these positive things in Vita, it's that the minute she dies, he realizes that he's allowed his ego to outstrip him of where he was. Like, his ego has gotten so far ahead of him that he totally fucking missed everything that was going on. And at that point...
And there's also the fact that it's his fault.
Absolutely, right? And you see this is a thing going on throughout that's kind of laid down, and it's never heavy-handed. The beautiful thing about this story is that at no point is it ever fall prey to sentimentality or heavy-handed metaphor or any of that bullshit that really can weigh down a really good story. It's told in this way that you really have to be looking for it, and it's really easy to miss some of the big things. Spider has been carried along by his ego for so long that he thinks he's the fucking king of the fucking, he's the cock of the walk. And when that happens, he realizes he's not. He was just fucking played. And somebody that not only he cared about, but somebody he had an intense amount of respect for, somebody he considered a friend, is now dead because of it. And the one theme that you see is that for all his bluster and bullshit, when Spider, confers the name of friend onto somebody, he cares about that person. That's not something that he's just like, oh, whatever. Like, he'll go to the mat for you. So...
Yeah, something that's I find really interesting about this series is that for all that Spider is, like, wacky and he kind of does things and there's not a lot of consequences for him, like, he beats the shit out of a guy and, like, nobody stops him. Like, there are really consequences. Like, he really gets hit hard throughout the series. Like, every decision that he makes weighs on him because of the consequences of what happens. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a lot of bad shit that happens in the back half of this book that comes out of things that he did.
That he doesn't think about.
Well, when she dies, he also realizes that, I think for the first time since he's been back in the city, that what he does actually does matter. Like, it does make a big difference. Mm-hmm. And negatively sometimes, so.
Well, and that the wrong people are starting to, like, pay attention to him. The people he wants to pay attention to him. But then there's the great thing is that he intersperses it with. He makes it really hard for Spider to do it. Warren Ellis does this great thing where there are moments where Spider is among the populace and people are looking at him going, "You're our guy. You're our guy." There's that whole scene to like right after he moves into
Puritan Muse.
Yeah, Puritan Muse, where he's down and the street vendors are giving him things and they're saying, "You're all right, Spider," and "God bless you, Spider," and stuff like that. And, like he's just surrounded by the new scum, right? Which is something you have to read the book to understand. But, there are all these really great moments that connect Spider to the community. But what really gets him is that he's spent all this time railing against people, like, not paying attention. And all of a sudden the wrong people are starting to pay attention to him, and he has to deal with that. And that has a lot of consequences.
What I noticed, too, was something that I thought was really strong about the book was that even his very first story, essentially, in the city, which I believe his first story is the riot.
Yeah, the transient
riot.
The Angels 8 riots.
Yeah, even that. Every single thing that he writes in this book has a consequence and is tied in some way to the bigger story of the Smiler, right? And so I thought it was really well done because so many other books could have written a great scene like the riots and like that and then moved on to other things and like completely forgotten about that. But that character, Fred Christ, comes back and is such an integral player in the book and you
don't even realize to what extent until very close to the end.
Yeah. And he keeps, Spider keeps running into him at different events and things, and even Spider is like, I should have figured this out.
Yeah.
Like, I should have fucking noticed, because he's always there, like he never was able to avoid Fred.
One of the things that I really loved is that even right till the end, he's throwing these curveballs that you never expected, but that he had been building up to the entire run of the book.
Yeah, and I think that's actually one of the things that makes this as good as it is that this story could have been a third of the size, but there's entire issues where no plot happens. It's just Spider's columns and him investigating the city and talking about things and showing the world and the depth of it and what it's really like and making it feel important, make you feel like you're really in the city and witnessing it. Well, and the fact that all of the things that he talks about end up mattering somehow.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, in the second volume, there's a story about revivals, people who get cryogenically frozen so they can be woken up in the future, and how the future spits on them because they're not wanted.
Right.
The writing in that episode,
and like it's very emotionally, I don't want to say fulfilling, but it really hits you hard. And that ends up being very important throughout the rest of the series, like something that you think is just kind of a throwaway thing. Yeah, and something that would be a throwaway thing from any other writer. Warren Ellis really makes it important.
Yeah, because Mary the Revival ends up being the key figure in the pictures that.
She provides a really key piece of evidence.
Well, and the brilliant thing about this, and this will allow me to kind of segue into talking into the run as a whole, is Warren Ellis does this brilliant fucking thing where you're like in the far-flung future and all this crazy shit happens, but he does this amazing thing where Spider will say something and it'll be like a quote from like Nixon or Mary, the Revival will say something. He keeps connecting it back to our time. He keeps connecting it back to things that are familiar to us. Because the brilliant thing about Transmet is that it's a satire of our community. You could take everything that's happening and apply it to life today, and there would be very little...
Yeah, people do. I mean, every single election since this has come out, I've seen people making comparisons to the Smiler, making comparisons to the Beast, talking about it in terms of Transmetropolitan, because it is incredibly immediate to American politics.
Absolutely. It makes me think of, there's a movie, Patty Chayefsky did the screenplay. I can't remember who directed it, but it's called Network. And it was made in like 70...
I want to say 76.
76, maybe 78, somewhere around there. Mid to late 70s. And it is such a brilliant film that you could watch it, and it would be like they made it about today. I mean, that's how like pertinent it is. And Transmet has that same kind of timeless quality to it. you can really, you look at it and you see what he's talking about. You see a world that's obsessed with escapism and just totally immersed in sex and violence and drugs and just not wanting anything to do with what's going on. And there's very few people that are standing up going, do you guys not see anything? Do you guys not fucking realize what's going on? And people are like, well, we don't really care.
Yeah, it's the apathy of the system and the way that the people in power use that to do whatever they want.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Smiler's a brilliant fucking template of the politician that only wants power for power's sake, which...
Well, if I did have to have one complaint about this, it would be the Smiler, because I think that there are points where he is cartoonishly villainous.
Yeah.
When he's jacking off with the American flag,
Yeah.
like, okay, I get it. He's fucking evil.
Well,
he's also just kind of a ridiculous character because originally his motive is like nothing. He's like, oh, I want to be president. Why? Meh. And then like later it becomes, oh, I want to keep power. I want total power.
I want to be president
absolute
because
power.
I want to fuck with everyone's lives.
Right.
It reminds me of the Patton Oswalt bit where he's like, he doesn't think George Bush wants to be the next president. He thinks he wants to be the last president. You know, and that's that. When I read the Smiler part, it reminded me of that. Like Smiler doesn't want to be president. He wants to be the last president. He doesn't want there to be a next election. He wants ultimate martial law power. Nothing fucks with him.
Well,
like
and
he wants totalitarian dictatorship.
Yeah, total. And I think that's. I mean, I think the Smiler is meant to be cartoonish because I think that if you look at somebody like fucking Ted Stevens, or a bunch of these idiots that were using terms like saying things like, "Oh, the body has ways of shutting down pregnancy from rape." You know, that's pretty cartoony to me.
Yeah.
That's like I picture them sitting in a fucking like big leather chair, stroking a white cat, and going, "Yes, no, rape is not an issue we need to take care of." I mean, it's really...
Well, it reminds me of the fact that these politicians are so out of touch with the world that, you know, the average person lives in because they haven't lived in the average world.
Absolutely.
If ever. And if they have, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
They kind of forgot what it was like to be young and to be, you know, poor and in the,
Absolutely.
you know, in your life. And that's what's happening with the Smiler and with the Beast in this, is they're such characters because they're so out of touch.
Yeah.
Even with this crazy world that is in Transmet, but they're so out of touch with that. They just look ridiculous.
Do we ever actually get a name for the Beast?
Yeah.
Yeah.
His name is, it's,
I know the Smiler is Gary Callahan.
yeah.
I can't
No,
remember
I
what
can't.
if
His
the
name
Beast
is...
gets a name.
Yeah, I'm looking.
It's,
This is excellent podcasting, by the way, guys.
I can't remember it. I will say this, though. I did realize this time that the Beast is a really great...
Nixon?
No, he's not Nixon. He's Reagan.
Oh.
He's Reagan, right? Because for all my problems with Reagan, at the end of the day, he did say some things that I was kind of like... that I can agree with, right? As opposed to, like...
Bob Heller.
Bob Heller is the other
No,
candidate.
yeah, he's the other candidate.
They say it in the first time. I think he gets him when he makes him one of the greatest things.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, I think... I mean, we could probably Google it. While they're looking it up, I'll talk to you. Just listen to the dulcet tones of my voice. So I think the point of it is that Transmet is tremendously entertaining, but at the same time it manages to be this really incredibly sharp political satire that's incredibly difficult to pull off, I think, without being heavy-handed. And I think that Warren Ellis, I think he does it masterfully. I think through Spider Jerusalem, because he sets the bar, like the tone so high and so insane, it's like you can have it. It comes off a lot more subtle than like a lot of like, I'm a big fan of The West Wing, but I also think there's definitely times when you could like put up a big banner on top of that show and be like, soapbox time, where we're like, this is what our morals must be, and this is what we must stand for, and this is blah, blah, blah. And I never feel that way reading Transmet. I'm just like, go and kick some ass, Spider. It's time. Like, you need to go out there.
Yeah. I mean, it makes it relatable in the fact that, like, you recognize the issue, but in no way is anyone ever being like, hey, pay attention. Does this look familiar? Because it's kind of like this thing that you should be.
Yeah.
Like, it never overtly draws a parallel. You're just supposed to infer parallels.
I always think of Before the Wayans brothers got way ridiculous with their movies, they made "Don't Be a Menace to South Central" while drinking your juice in the hood. And every time they would have a moment, Keenan Ivory Wayans would come in as the mailman, and he'd be like, "Metaphor." And that's how I feel a lot of this stuff goes, and I never feel that reading Transmet.
One of the reasons why I feel like Transmetropolitan is Warren Ellis's best work is that he is able to affect a level of subtlety that I think he lacks in a lot of his other works.
Yeah, absolutely.
He has a tendency too much to go, just be way too fucking on the nose with something. Mm-hmm. Very specifically pointing out, hey, look, metaphor. Woo-hoo.
Yeah.
And this, he's a lot, he uses a gentle hand.
Yeah. I mean, almost to the point where there's a lot of stuff to miss and read again the second time. Which I think is
lots
a
of
good thing.
nuance.
Yeah. Which I think brings us to something else that we haven't talked about yet, but definitely needs to be talked about, which is how fucking beautiful this book is.
Well, not just beautiful, but very expertly put together.
Yeah.
I think, and I was actually talking with somebody about this recently. The writing is almost too good in that it overshadows Derek Robertson's art, which is a master work.
Yeah. No,
you don't notice how good the art is because the writing is so present. But this would not be the same series without Derek Robertson.
Absolutely not.
And it's not just his designs, it's not just his line work, it's the way the panels are laid out.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
the book is really, really well laid out.
He does things that people don't do, panels inside panels, but then things stick out of the inner panels and flow into the outer panels.
Well, and he also, I think, Derek Robertson is not just a great artist, he's a great, he's not just a great penciler, right? I think Jim Lee's a great penciler, but I don't necessarily think that Jim Lee is a great artist. I think when Derek Robertson approaches these, he does things to Spider's face and Spider's body, depending on what he's doing. That's Spider's face can be very hard and chiseled at times.
Lots of lines, lots of almost looks dirty.
Yeah. But then
it'll get really clean and the lines will be really straight.
Yeah.
There's a lot of push and pull that happens, and I think it really affects the mood of the series.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things he does with art that I noticed in this that I don't see a lot of other artists do is there are plenty of panels where the background is blurred because you're not meant to see that yet,
because it doesn't matter.
The focus changes in the next panel. It's the same art, but the focus, the Photoshop filter is reversed on the object. So if the first you'll see Spider's face and the background's blurry, and then Spider's face will be blurry and the background will be sharp. And it just, some really subtle things that I think make the art really pop out.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, there's a lot of layering that happens, things on top of things, but he's incredibly good at putting a lot of stuff in the backgrounds of the panels, without it really detracting from what's happening in the foreground. It's never busy, it's never confused, even though there's so much stuff layered in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm actually flipping through Volume 5 right now in the Dante Street riots, and there's all this stuff happening, and he uses the color palette to differentiate what's happening in the foreground between the crowd and the background. And so there's a lot of stuff in the panel, but the action is very, very clear because of that layer of separation between the two.
Well, it never feels crowded. I mean, this is a level of details, background detail that who was the name of the guy that fucking Dave Sims got to do his backgrounds?
I don't.
And Cerebus. God, I cannot remember his name. It was Gerhard. That's who it was, I think. And you get these backgrounds where you can see the bricks in the walls of the buildings and shit like that. And I think Derek Robertson does that. There is so much going on in the city.
And there is so much expression in his character.
Absolutely.
There's a tendency, especially among comic artists, for characters to seem very static and to have the same faces. And even without the word bubbles, there's so much that you can tell about what's going on in this series. Just from looking at the expressions of the characters, the way that they hold their bodies.
Yeah. I think that he's really good at using light and shadow too to create that effect.
Absolutely.
Sometimes, Spider will be completely in silhouette except for the green and red on his glasses.
Oh, God,
when he's kind of looming in the background.
The moment where he's decided he's going to start covering the elections, and he's sitting down and he's talking to his entertainment system, and he sits down in the chair and he's like, entertainment system, give me fire. And there's no panel, there's just him in a chair with all his holographic fire around him as he's like, yes, give me information. And it wouldn't have been half as good, or it could have been even worse, cheesy, except that Derek Robertson does such an amazing job on it.
There's actually a really awesome callback to it, and I think I might have it bookmarked. But it's where Mitch Royce is trying to recover Spider's evidence file.
One of my favorite
And he's sitting in
parts.
front of his computer, and like he turns and he looks out of the panel at you, and his screen is just flames, and he's like,
Yes!
And it's just fucking. It's such a brilliant moment because you've watched him putting together all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's before he's putting it together, but you can tell what's going
Well,
on.
but he knows. He
and
knows
like
that
he's just got this look on his face, and it's so perfect.
Yeah, see, I was supposed to go to a thing tonight, and I'm not gonna go to a thing tonight. I'm gonna go home and reread the end of this fucking story because it's that good. Like, yeah, I mean, Derek, and we've said Derek is, I think, a show favorite. He's an incredibly nice guy.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I've told this story before, but have I told this story?
I picked up the sketch for you.
So I have Spider leering down at me from my wall, saying, mocking my ability to mocking my not being able to smoke, as he would he would, but
he's got cancer blocking pills or whatever.
Yeah, fuck him.
Yeah,
anti-cancer trait.
Anti-cancer trait.
Yeah. I love the art in this. I think there's a lot of scenes that are panels that are super cinematic too. Like there's a lot of times you'll enter a room and there's an establishing panel before any dialogue has happened, and like that's kind of rare in comics, especially nowadays. I think where they don't take the time to use like setup panels and like lots of great panels of just like Spider getting to a location, just like walking through the city, because they seem sort of unimportant at first, but there's so much going on in the background, like you guys have said, that really adds a great vibe to the city.
Yeah, you're really present in the city when you read this.
It's such
story.
a character,
and there's so many pages where they're breaking out of the panels, where the panels are over top of each other. Like it never feels like you're isolated in any one moment because they're always flowing into each other.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of pages where the pages at the back of the page isn't blank or isn't white, it's black
or red. There's some that are red, which
and
threw
like,
me at first.
And like literally the characters are just floating in the blackness of the page, and it's very evocative emotionally.
Well, and I feel like another great thing is that I feel like dialogue to comics is a lot like score to movies, and like you have a ton of movies these days that are just over fucking scored. Every moment that somebody isn't talking, there's like swelling strings and booming horns, and it's like silence is okay. You can have silence, and I feel like there's definitely moments in this. There's a moment when Spider has come back from like looking into all this shit after Vita is killed, where he just walks into his apartment and he goes out on the balcony. He says something to the assistants, and he goes out on the balcony and he takes his glasses off, and then he just kind of collapses up against the thing, and there's no fucking dialogue.
Yeah.
There's nothing. There's just him freaking out, and it's like it's an incredibly powerful scene, and there's no dialogue because there doesn't need to be because the art is good enough to fucking make you feel that.
I'm looking at another page that's all no dialogue.
Oh my
where
God!
He's just thrown the first grenade off the building, and then his assistants come out and, without saying anything, grab some grenades off the grenade belt and start throwing
For
them.
us,
For
all of us.
Let's talk about the assistants for a minute because I think they're incredibly important to the series.
Oh my God,
favorite
they
characters.
are.
Okay.
One thing I did want to note is that I don't think this book would have been possible without Derek Robertson and later on Rodney Ramos.
Yeah, no, Rodney Ramos, there's a huge improvement as far as I'm concerned to the quality of the art once Ramos starts inking.
Yeah, inkers don't get called out frequently enough, and Rodney Ramos really does add immeasurably to the quality of the series.
If you look at other stuff from early Vertigo too, and I know this wasn't Vertigo originally, but if you look at stuff like Sandman, where they had like constantly rotating inkers and stuff because that was on such a huge budget, the quality lapses between episodes or issues. You'll go back and you'll read old Sandman stuff, and it's like, oh, this issue is like beautifully inked, and the next one it's like, what happened to the inker?
It's actually something that really bothered me about Morrison's The Invisibles.
Yeah.
Because the artists changed all the time.
And
some of them were just not as good as others.
Yeah, it's so strong in this series to have like the same artist inking team for the majority of the book. Like it makes a huge difference, and I think the art is so beautiful. And the coloring, The coloring is also fantastic in this book. The
Yeah.
use of shadow and like rich colors, and in some scenes like really washed out, really light colors to evoke different emotions. I think works incredibly well.
The facial expressions of the characters is amazing. You get great like Steve Dillon, who did the art on Preacher. He's a good artist, but he can only draw like 3 or 4 faces as far as I'm concerned. I feel like Jesse Custer has 2 forms of emotion. Nothing and gonna kick the shit out of you.
Yeah.
Whereas Spider, like, I definitely feel him going throughout the whole
not just
range.
Spider, everybody. Like,
Yeah.
you can see their emotions very plainly.
And each
Absolutely.
side character is so unique that a person never enters panel and you're like, is this a guy that I've seen before? Because they look so different from
Right.
one another that it's easy.
And their character is very strong.
This is a brilliant segue into something.
Yelena and Shannon,
The Filthy Assistants, which
filthy assistants.
are, I think, unique. And you brought it up, so go ahead. Like, take it away.
Well, it would be easy for them to be background characters or for them to be ancillary to Spider, and they're really not. Like, both of them, I think, come into the story not knowing who they are.
Right.
And Spider really does take them on as proteges. Like, each of them really becomes a full person over the course of this series and really learns, like, who they are. And, really grow to care for and respect Spider as a person, even when they fucking hate his guts.
Yeah.
Not just at the beginning,
Which
but
is
they get him too. They
often-
still fucking hate his guts, but they
It's
care
love
about
hate.
him.
No,
Yeah.
but they don't.
Yeah.
That's the thing. They don't. There's this moment where they want to hate him, but they're starting to not, and they
Yeah.
can't deal with that.
Well,
There's
it's
their
when
moment
out,
where they're like,
they have their day out and they're on the
they're-
bench.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
they're like, because
Yeah,
there's
they fucking
there's
love
nothing like working with that. They call him something. There's nothing like working with him, and blah blah blah. And Yelena goes, because if there was, we would do it. And Shannon's like, yeah, of course. And they get up and they skip away. And then Spider walks up as soon as they left the panel, and he's like, they love my ass, and it's true because
Yeah.
you can't not. This is the thing.
Well, it becomes really obvious later in the book that Spider needs them a lot more than
They need him, yeah.
But that starts much earlier in the book. It becomes obvious once Spider's sick and they're like physically carrying him places.
Absolutely.
But earlier in the book, like he couldn't do any of the stuff that he's doing without them.
Yeah,
Like,
no,
that
he really
happens
can.
very early on in the story. The minute that she leaves to go, Chandra. How do you say
Shannon.
it? Shannon. That's
Shannon.
what it is.
It's Channon.
Shannon.
I think.
Yeah.
No,
It's
well,
spelled Shannon.
I mean, I always pronounce it as Shannon.
Yeah.
But
I think either way.
I don't know.
And it's a
Future
made-up name.
Yeah. With the minute she leaves and he's immediately asking for a new assistant is, like starts to hint at the fact that like he's not really very good at working by himself because he can't really keep track of time or days or when things are due or when his interviews. I mean, like he just doesn't really have a great grasp on, all
well,
the
he
minor...
needs to be, and I think this is, I don't necessarily know that I agree with that, because he's not asking for a new assistant. He's just kind of fallen into his work thing.
Yeah, well,
I think what it is that he needs them because they keep him grounded.
Mm-hmm.
He needs them because he gets so far ahead of himself that he gets up his own ass.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that they could be very, and this is kind of a thing that's been going on a lot lately, is that a lot of people have been pointing at things and going, that's not a good character. That's a trope. That's just bad writing. And it could be very easy for either Shannon or Yelena to be the whole manic pixie dream girl type trope, right? Where they're here to pull Spider out of his funk and put him on the right path.
It would be easy for Channon to be like the hard ass female.
Yeah, with
like,
a heart of gold.
What's her name? The actress.
Warrior Princess.
No. Michelle Rodriguez. It would
Right,
be easy
yeah,
for her to
exactly,
be a
right?
Michelle Rodriguez character, like
Yeah.
a cardboard cutout,
Yeah.
tough ass girl, and she's not that.
No, they're not.
Like
they're,
even in Volume 2, like there's the thing with her boyfriend becoming a foglet,
Which,
and
yeah.
it shows how emotionally, that she is an emotional person,
that she
is
has
a character.
Yeah, exactly, and that she's got. The thing is that they're both characters. They're not there simply for Spider-Man or Spider Jerusalem to have a sounding board. They're not there
Spider-Man.
just Spider-Man
Jerusalem.
Spider-Man Jerusalem. Come on, you want it. They're not there just for him to have a sounding board or to like keep him going. They're each characters in their own right, and they each have their own backgrounds, and they each have their own things that are going on with them, to the point where there's 3 or 4 issues that are just them kind of fucking around.
and
doing
they
shit.
have their own relationship, and the differences in their characters are very visible when they're hanging out with each other. And I think that those sines are really great.
Absolutely.
You know, when they're fucking like, we're going to take his credit card and we're going to order flying clit liquor machines.
They'd probably send a squadron of flying clit liquor machines if he asked them to. Do they have those? We should check.
And they both. The other thing that I really love about them at the end of the story is that they both have direction forward. Like Spider's story is done, but theirs is not. Like they both now know who they are and know what's going on in their life enough to like move forward with their lives.
And they also do have relationships outside of the core group. For example, Yelena. You know, even though in Volume 4 she says that Mitch is not actually her uncle, throughout the rest of the book, she keeps calling him Uncle Mitch.
Right.
And so it really, even though it didn't start as that uncle-niece relationship, it evolved into it throughout the book.
Right.
And I love her dad, too.
Yeah.
Like a great character.
Even though his facial hair changes in every single appearance that he has.
Hey, you can shave your face hair between every day.
I think that's all part and parcel with the whole, like, we're living in the future thing.
I suppose that's true.
When the cops come to arrest him and he's like... He says, you will all get to experience what it feels like to have a dog rapist's penis lodged deep in your colon or something to that effect. It's like the most beautiful thing ever because he's just as pleasant as possible, as pleasant as you'd like.
I also really like that his character design isn't that far off from Spider, too.
Yeah.
And which draws a lot of parallel between those two. And the fact that, like, he is very quickly drawn to Spider and is like, oh, I used to, you know, want to make things right. And he's, like, very quickly buys into all of this because, you know, he's a philanthropist.
And,
I think that there's actually an incredibly significant moment very early in Volume 8, which I actually bookmarked, where Yelena's getting out of bed. And you see that she's got the spider tattoo on her ass. Mm-hmm. And there's no dialogue. Like, it's her getting up in the morning for, like, 3 or 4 pages. Yeah. And she says, "Morning, City." And you see the tattoo on your ass, and that just tells you so much about what the character has been through and how she's evolved throughout the series with no words.
And when they're out on the town having their Mary Tyler Moore day... Shannon turns to her and says, "You're starting to talk like he does.
You sound like him."
Yeah,
they say that multiple times.
And it's so.
And there's also the you don't have to smoke those.
But he's not around. And she's like, "Oh, I guess I just got used to it." And so I feel like.
Well, and they say it explicitly at the end. Chandra's like, "Well, yeah, I'm not the next Spider. She's the next Spider."
Yeah.
You know,
they also imply pretty heavily that the two of them are canoodling.
Yeah,
Spider and Yelena.
I get the impression that she's pregnant at the end of the book.
She looks a little bit pregnant, but I've never been 100% sure because it's hard. Like it's really hard to tell.
That's my theory is that she's preggers at the end.
I feel like they're. Well, I don't know about that, but I definitely feel like Yelena and Spider are getting it on throughout the.
A
majority of the last half of the story.
Well, then they imply, too, that, they, like, jokingly set up that Spider and Chandra, or they wake up... Shannon. They wake up next to each other one morning. But Spider he's like, I just got in bed with her to freak her out kind of a deal to me. Like, it seems... which I thought was really hilarious.
I'm holding up the thing I found with Mitch Royce in front of the computer. I had it marked.
Here's the...
I'm going to walk into a bar and drink it, and then I'm going to start a fight with 50 men and win it, and then I'm going to walk into a bar and drink it, and then I'm going to make use of a truly staggering amount of prostitutes.
And what is it? I'm going to take a big sack, and tell them to fill it with drugs, and then I'm going to do all the drugs. So good.
Mitchell Royce, another character that could have easily just been like the fucking like.
Where's my article, Spider?
Right. Like the
where's
fucking.
My fucking collar?
Where's
my police? The chief of detectives. It's like I can't cover you with the mayor. Like Royce could have.
The mayor is on my cock. We need.
Yeah, right. But he doesn't.
And when he's walking into the word, and he's like got his head back, and he's whistling, and he gets to the door, and he fucking slumps over, and he like stomps through it, glowering.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of depth to what is ultimately a very minor character in the overall story.
But incredibly.
Yeah, he could have been the J. Jonah Jameson, but he ended up being the counterpart to Spider.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean,
I'm the editor. You're the writer. You write the columns and do the research. I'm the editor. I do every other fucking
I wipe
thing.
your ass.
I wipe your
and
ass.
I make sure
And-
he's got a rant, and it's another thing that reminds me of Network, the fact that there's a lot of monologuing going on, and I think just about every main character gets their chance to monologue, and everyone you're just like, fuck yes. You're like reading it with one fist up in the air, like yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, I think that he's such an integral part to that story, too, because they aren't just, he isn't just Spider's boss. He's also his partner and his friend.
Yeah.
And
There are
Absolutely.
minor characters,
Yeah.
but there are no unimportant characters.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly. And Warren Ellis does a great job of making use of all of them.
Something else that I had not noticed in any previous read through this, and I first noticed it in volume 9, which is pretty close to the end, but in kind of the entire final arc. So throughout the series, Spider has his like half square, half round glasses.
Yes.
Throughout the entire last arc, Shannon is wearing round glasses and Yelena is wearing square glasses that are very specifically the two bifurcated halves of Spider Jerusalem. And I think that's something that's very important to the entire ending of the series. Like, it really shows in a very visual way, like, the extent to which that they have become a trio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and also, I was wrong earlier when I said that it was Shannon that says that she's the new Spider. It's Royce that says she's the new Spider.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Shannon says, actually, I'm pretty sure she's the old Yelena, but I get the point. You
Yeah.
know, like,
Well, and that
she's
line-
just kind of found herself.
I
you know?
love that
Like,
line too, because I think that there's a lot of female superheroes that are referenced only, like
They're distaff
they're
counterparts
yeah.
to a male hero.
Yeah, exactly. And so when she says that, it's very much like, no, she's Yelena.
Also, I think it just like goes to further the point that like throughout this story they've discovered who they are again. Because for a while they're kind of lost, and that's when they come to Spider originally. Is they're like, I don't know, I'm doing an internship. I don't really know what's going on. I'm the new assistant or whatever.
Yeah.
And so they find themselves as characters again. And so
He
it's
gives
a
them
great-
attack wounds.
Also,
He doesn't give them attack wounds.
Yeah.
He lets them know that they have their own attack wounds.
He
so
shows
that they
them
can
the
use
attack wound inside themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
and Yelena totally does look pregnant in these last panels.
She does.
Oh,
And
she
like,
really
there's
does.
one panel
Well, she-
specifically where she really looks pregnant.
She looks chubby.
And so I've never been able to tell for sure if that's intentional or if it's just the way that he drew it. But given the rest of this series, I have to imagine that it's pretty intentional.
Yeah, I think that's a cool.
And there's
theory.
also something that Shannon actually says something like, they pretend, or
Yeah, they are. What
I
is it?
know that they have sex when I'm not around. They just pretend that they don't.
Yeah.
She thinks I don't know what they do when I'm not around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a kind of a cool implied possible ending to the story. So
Yeah.
And again, it's that kind of thing that this series does really well, where it doesn't overtly say anything.
Yeah.
You know, like it never is just like nailing nails into your head.
Yeah, no, it's always like, you take out of this what you need to.
Yeah, there was actually a very specific moment, I think, where the series really, 100% sold me, and it's in Volume 5, when Spider is telling the story of the girl who was molested by her brother,
Yeah.
and he kills himself, and she missed him on his birthday because he was her brother.
Yeah.
And just the level of pathos
Yeah.
and emotion and the way that it's conveyed, and it's not really this rubbing it in your face way, but it's making, I think, a subtle point and really speaking to the inherent humanity of people, even in a place as depraved as the city.
Right.
Well,
there
and
still is, the human heart is still the same
And it's-
thing that it's always been.
And
The
this,
fact that it's told through Spider, who has a huge amount of empathy, even if it's not totally obvious.
yeah, which I think those are my favorite moments.
Right.
Moments when
it was
he's
when I
telling-
read that I was complete from that point on, there was nothing that the series could ask of me that I was not willing to give.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a moment in, I think it's the fourth trade, or this young girl has just had to pawn her teddy bear type thing, and
Oh,
Spider's walking around, doing
it's in the
his
4th volume.
Yeah, and he's kind of telling a story. This is kind of happening in the background of what Spider's doing. He's kind of walking around doing his Spider thing, and then there's a panel, and she's like, "I've lost my mommy," and he kind of crouches down, and his face really softens, and he's like, "Well, no, we'll find her. It's cool. It's like no sweat." And she's like, "Well, will you help me?" And he goes, "Why else do you think I've hung around here for so long?" And it's just like, oh God. It's like that could have been, and like everything else, like Spider's, like his sunglasses, like the whole story arc could have been incredibly cheesy and incredibly like, oh, it's not. That moment means a lot to you because you know that under all this kind of bullshit that he's laid on top of himself, Spider Jerusalem wants people.
He's
hates
a genuine
people
human
so much
being.
because he knows that they're capable of more.
Well, yeah.
Right.
Well,
and I think that's ultimately why I love this series so much is because Spider is who I am. Like, he desperately cares about and loves humanity as a whole, and he's just frustrated and disappointed that people are so shitty to each other when they don't have to be.
Yeah.
It reminds me of something Carlin said. He said, "I love and cherish individuals where I meet them, and I both hate and despise the groups they belong to." And I really think that I always equate the two of them. They're both had some pretty scathing commentary on society. But yeah, the voice in my head is Spider Jerusalem, the one that's telling me that makes me want to climb to the top of a very tall building and just
do not lie to the chair leg of truth.
Yeah, right. I mean, seriously, it's difficult. It's difficult to look around at the world and be like, how the fuck are you people not paying attention to this level? But I have hope. I have a hope at the end of Transmet. Spider gives me hope.
Well, I also not to move on too quickly from that point because I totally agree. It's the same kind of thing as when you watch horrible shit happen in the world and you're like, why isn't anybody fucking doing anything? Like, that's the feeling that Spider has too. But something that really strikes me about the series too that I really enjoy is how much happens off panel, like how much is happening kind of off camera in the background, and that they will tell you about stuff that has happened previously as opposed to showing you everything. Like, there's lots of the moment of telling the story about the sister or the brother and sister. And at the end of the story, when Royce, at the very last issue, when Royce is leaving the city and he goes through the toll booth and they tell the story about how Spider was there and his assistants beat him up, like, that all happens off panel. Like, that has nothing... they didn't have to show that. Yeah. And I think that's, again, the great subtlety of the book.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff that happens in the background of the city or that you see a single panel of, there's a war in Africa, or not Africa, Australia, and there's refugees who are on their way to, Norway.
Yeah.
And there's a sign at one point, Dr. Impossible strikes in South Africa or something like that, like a fucking supervillain.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, Jesus Christ, what is the, we're present throughout the series in the city and nowhere else.
Right.
They do,
but you get the sense that there's a world
well.
outside of that. The only time that we leave the city is when Spider is on the mountain at the beginning and he's on the mountain at the end.
Well, he leaves to go to California.
Right, but you don't see him in California.
Right, and then they go hide out, sort of outside. It's still in the city, but it's in, a better part of the city.
Yeah, it's a nice...
Right.
And that's the thing is that the city is so big that it encompasses all of this stuff. I mean, he goes to the reservations at one point, which is ostensibly inside the city, but these things are huge.
Yeah. Yeah, because...
some of them are even interdimensional, where they take up the same space as the city, but you're walking through a doorway and it's completely different.
Yeah, and there are aliens, obviously, because they have all this alien DNA with the transient community. But we don't really hear too much about what is mankind doing on the spacefaring level? What's actually going on there? There's a lot of questions that aren't answered because they're not relevant to the story, but you get the sense that there is a greater world going on.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I live in fear that one day that they're going to do it before Transmetropolitan. Because fuck you, DC.
Well, but no, because Warren Ellis and Derek Robertson own it, so they can't do it. It is their property.
It's not like Watchmen.
Which is why the shitty thing about that is that as DC has been going through and making all these really amazing omnibus editions, and I would love one of Transmet because it would be amazing, and I would get all this great stuff in the end. But I don't see it in the cards. But yeah,
that would be a huge omnibus.
It wouldn't be bigger than the Invisibles.
Oh, that's true.
The Invisibles is like fucking 3
Invisible
inches
is
thick.
7 thick volumes, and this is 10 thin ones.
Well, maybe it would be around the same.
Yeah, how many issues
same
is
thickness.
Invisible?
I think the Invisibles is 75.
And yeah, I was thinking something.
I mean, it's
like that.
1,500 pages. It's 3.5 inches.
It's
thick.
less than 100. I remember that for sure.
Yeah. And this has 60 and then probably like 5 bonus side.
Yeah, there was the 0 volume, which
Tales
I don't
of
actually
Human
know,
Waste.
which are just spider columns.
I actually own it, and I also own the 11th volume, which was a Kickstarter exclusive that I randomly ran into in Seattle and purchased because I'm a fucking fan. I'm a fanboy about this. This is one of the few things I geek out about.
Yeah, there's lots of back matter for this series.
Yeah, there's definitely some ancillary stuff.
Yeah.
So I feel like this could be a huge omnibus.
But yeah,
I could totally see them doing 2 hardcovers in a slipcase.
Yeah,
which I would love.
Awesome. Yeah, or even 4.
There's some Christmas specials too that I didn't read.
Well, all of those are in there.
That's all in the
Yeah, all of those are included in the trades.
I read them as
already.
single issues, so.
But yeah, so I think we can all agree that you need to, if you have not, or if you love comic books and you love the craft of storytelling and the craft of storytelling mixed the medium of graphic art, then Transmetropolitan is a fucking masterpiece, and it may not be your favorite thing. It is definitely my favorite thing.
Yeah. It's my favorite thing too. This is my absolute favorite comic.
But you need to read it because it's important. It's important because I think I can objectively say that it's one of the best things that have been written in modern comics.
It's immediate. It's human. It shows that comic books can be works of art.
Absolutely.
I think that this is a masterpiece. I think in 100 years, this is going to be on the Barnes & Noble, classics of the 20th or 21st century.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that the series can lose you in places. I think the beginning is sort of rough, and you have to, really love comic books and really want to wade through.
I had no problem with the beginning. It's fine.
I didn't either, but I can see why people do.
It doesn't feel like there's enough forward momentum at the beginning. I don't care enough about what Spider's doing until he's doing stuff that I care about.
Right.
I guess, and then maybe that's a shitty way to read comics, but
I guess the difference for me, and I'm actually not going to spoil this, even though we've spoiled so much else, because if by some chance you have not read Transmetropolitan, I don't want to spoil this to you, but it has in my opinion, the greatest beginning and ending.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That I've ever seen. The first page just opens with a narration box. Up a fucking mountain.
Yes,
and the ending, which I'm not actually going to say what it is, I laughed and I shouted and I exclaimed because it's the perfect ending for the series.
I laughed out loud. And I put it down. And although I was sad that it was over, I was like, fuck. Yeah,
so rarely are endings good, and this is the perfect ending for this series.
The absolute ending that I feel is the very last page of the volume 0. It's a picture, very well done, of Shannon and Yelena, and it says that Warren Ellis and Derek Robertsons dedicate these books to Shannon and Yelena. Mm-hmm. And it's just amazing.
Yeah,
because it's after all the bonus issues that are in it, it's just a single page.
Right.
So it wasn't even in any of the issues. It was just for that book.
Yeah, I think that the issue or the books, you have to work a little bit to get into them, I think. And I think if you're willing to put the work in, it picks up pretty quickly after that. And I do think that there are points in the middle where I felt like it meandered a little bit and it kind of was in danger of losing me. But I was in such a push to race through it that I was like, I don't even want to set this down to take a break, but normally I would at this point.
See, I love that about the series. It takes place over 5 years.
Yeah.
And it really does feel like time is going by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you get a sense of that, and I like the fact that it kind of slows down in the middle.
Yeah.
And you get this period of just being in the city.
Right.
and you get to see this world and see the things that Spider's doing, and it doesn't go by too quickly.
Yeah, and as the pacing goes, like it threw me the change of pace a couple of times, but I think it's important, and I think that it's not a bad thing, but I think that it can like be a little bit, unexpected at first when it's like has such forward momentum, and then it's like, well, we got to take care of some side issues and stuff, and we got to give a little bit of time to.
Well, it's like
to set up
like High Fidelity making a mixtape.
Yeah.
You gotta have a good hook to open people, and then you got to step it up a notch. But you don't want to blow your load too fast, so then you got to bring it down a little bit.
Right.
Like I think that it can be a little bit jarring if you're not necessarily used to more introspective comics.
Right.
But I really think that it's a necessary part of the series.
Yeah. Overall, I think I enjoyed it.
And I mean, if you've read Preacher, I think that wanders a great deal more.
Oh, I can't get through Preacher, so I know that this is definitely like moves forward at a much better pace. I've tried this to read Transmet, I think maybe twice. Maybe this is the second time that I've tried. I think that probably is true. But Preacher, I've tried at least 3 times to read that, and I just can't even get through the first book most times. It really does not grab me in any way, and I don't know. And so it's definitely not. I'm not at that level with Transmet. I think that it requires a little work from the reader, but I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I don't think that it would be possible for it to be as good as it is if it didn't ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
you
need to be involved in it.
It asks you to give a shit, and I think that's fine.
And I think that's what Spider asks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's his.
That's the
right?
only thing that he asks. Just give a shit.
Yeah.
About something.
Right.
So let's.
Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Cade, or?
No, I think I'm good. I hit upon most of the things. I mean, I absolutely love this book. It's one of my all-time favorites. I was actually talking to Joe last night that I don't actually have a favorite comic book, but this, is definitely tied for my favorite.
Yeah. It's really strong.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've encountered anyone who's read it who hasn't liked it.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of surprising for me, I guess, that I've taken this long to get to reading it all the way through.
Yeah, and you read in a comic book show. You worked in a comic book show.
Yeah, but I
so
think
there's
it
no
was
excuse
just.
for you.
I think it was just because everybody told me it was good, so I knew it was good, so I didn't really bother.
Right.
I read enough about it to know what it was about and the kind of people that would enjoy it, so that I could easily, if they're like, oh, I'm looking for something different, and I just read, these things. What else should I read? Like, I could steer them in the direction of
Which
Transmet.
is a great segue
Yeah,
for the
so
recommendations
what
for
should
tonight.
they read?
There is one thing that I wanted to interject first.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just, as we were walking out the door to go to the podcast, Joe's daughter, who's 11, asked, can I read Transmetropolitan? And you said not yet.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a small significant point there, and that you do have to be of a certain level of maturity to read this, because there is a lot of sex and a lot of violence, and I think a lot of the points would go over your head at her age.
Absolutely.
But I definitely think it's the kind of thing that I would give to a 15 or 16 year old.
Oh, yeah.
Because I could see it
absolutely.
being very influential
Yeah.
to their thought process, and I think it makes a lot of important points that many people don't recognize.
I was definitely reading shit like this either in novel form or comic book form when I was in high school. So I think 15, 16 is not too young at all.
Yeah.
I mean, it is violent, but it's no more violent or graphic than anything you're seeing on TV or video games.
She's
now.
reading Invincible right now.
Yeah,
so.
There's quite a bit of violence and some nudity, but there's no outright pornographic sex.
No. But I think that she's not quite old enough to understand what.
Yeah, I don't think that she would
agree.
appreciate the
I
sex.
think
exactly.
once she hits high school, I think she'll be able
absolutely.
to. Well, and even if it is a little bit too much of her now, I also think she'll appreciate it more.
More absolutely,
as
which
she's
is
older, and I just think that about most people. It's you're going to appreciate it more once you start to really be interested in things like politics and
right.
Lobbying and journalism and things that a lot of middle school and elementary school kids might not care about yet.
Which is exactly where I'm coming from.
Well, and I just noticed something that I'd never noticed before, just looking at the cover of Volume 10. It's Spider sitting on a toilet. The toilet's an hourglass.
Yeah.
And I don't think I ever outright really looked and recognized what that was and the significance of it. My brain just went, oh, it's a toilet.
Yeah.
And I never really examined it closely.
Also, if you're ever in Isotope Comics in San Francisco, the 61st issue of Transmetropolitan is there, which you can't get anywhere else, and it's just drawn on the lid of a toilet seat because they have all their artists that come to do signings there draw. And so it says on it, like, because I think Warren Ellis and Derek Robertson were there at the same time, so it says Transmetropolitan issue 61, and it's Spider on a toilet, and then drawn on a toilet seat lid. So it's definitely a thing to check out. I'm sure you can find pictures of it online. But if you're in San Francisco and you're near Isotope Comics,
you should go.
They're a great little shop, and they're very cool.
All right. So.
Well, we're gonna deviate from our normal format a little bit.
Yeah.
Normally, everybody brings something and we vote on it. And we had a little bit of a discussion because we're only going to be doing the long run like every 3 months. Mm-hmm. We don't want to vote because then somebody might not get to recommend something for a year, 2 years.
Right.
And if they keep bringing the same book back, obviously because they want to talk about it, then we're not getting as many recommendations.
Right.
So
for the long run specifically, one person is just going to pick it. We're going to go in order. And so we're just going to go in a circle until we come back around. But everybody else who isn't picking the next book is going to recommend something for you to read if you liked Transmetropolitan.
Right.
Yeah, we thought that if, this is a good way to still give recommendations for other books and to talk about series, but also to just be like, hey, you just read Transmetropolitan along with us. Where should you go from here?
Right.
So, who wants to go first? Toby?
Sure, I'll go first. One of the things about Warren Ellis that you either like or hate is that he has a very specific flavor to him and a very strong voice. And there aren't necessarily a lot of things out there that are like Warren Ellis. Like, he's so distinct. Mm-hmm. So the thing that I'm recommending is another Warren Ellis book, but I think it's one that doesn't get read as much as some of his more popular work. Mm-hmm. It's a limited series. It's one trade that's like 3 issues called Bad World.
And it's hilarious.
If with all of the Spider Jerusalem columns where he's kind of like looking at a facet of the city and talking about it, Bad World is very much like that, but about the real world. It's a lot of stories that Warren Ellis gathered, most of them from the internet. And so it's like one page, which is a depiction of the story with text boxes over top of it, much like a Spider Jerusalem column, where he's talking about some real thing in our own world and just examining these different facets of reality. And a lot of it is like conspiracy theories and like crazy people and just like odd news of the world. It will make you feel a little bit sad for humanity because these people exist and they're among us. But I think it examines something that's not often examined closely in our civilization. And it's funny.
Yeah.
It's well written. I think he did a follow-up called Bad Signal as well, which I have not read. But, if you have the opportunity to check out Bad World, if you like the Spider Jerusalem columns as an individual thing, I think you'll like it.
All right.
I also brought another Warren Ellis book. This one is widely touted on the internet as the spiritual successor to Transmetropolitan, and while I don't know if I agree with that because I've only read one issue, the book that I brought is called Dr. Sleepless by Warren Ellis and Ivan Rodriguez, which is fairly new. Well, it went on a number of hiatuses, but the second trade, which finishes the story, is going to come out soon. And it is it's a book set in the near future and follows the exploits of a mad scientist who returns to a city 3 years after he leaves it and returns a different man. So basically the beginning of Transmet.
Yeah.
He rules the airwaves, just like Transmet, through his mastery of all things technological and with his thought-provoking radical rhetoric. He addresses the disenfranchised citizens of Havenshire, acknowledging their disappointment in the future that they have created, and with his vast resources and knowledge, it offers the people of Havenshire a shard of hope to change the world. the way it was described to me was a pure mixture of Transmetropolitan and Grant Morrison's Invisibles.
Yeah, you always describe Dr. Sleepless as Science Jerusalem.
I like to call Dr. Sleepless Science Jerusalem.
I really like Dr. Sleepless, actually. I read it when the first trade came out, and it was like... And I actually, which is weird because I read it before I read Transmet, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And now having read Transmet, and after even like immediately after picking up Transmet, I was like, oh...
It is
okay,
science.
I see what's going on.
I read the first, I want to say 2 or 3 issues of Dr. Sleepless.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't follow up on it because it felt like a little bit of a retread, and because it really did feel like Transmetropolitan Take 2 with less subtlety. But that's not to say that it's bad.
Yeah,
it's just not as good as the best comic I've ever read.
Yeah,
no, and I totally agree with that. You know, I see it as kind of a spiritual successor in that it's nowhere near as good, but it's kind of what is the word I'm looking for? It's kind of like a side volume kind of thing.
Kind of like in Japan, where they'll do a series and then they'll do like a slightly different version of the series where it's like a little bit of a different take. Like it's the same characters, but they're in different roles. No, I get what you're saying, and I think I should probably read the whole thing before I judge it too harshly.
Yeah,
I'd like to read it again.
Yeah,
I think Warren Ellis's Avatar stuff runs the gamut, and I didn't dislike Dr. Sleepless, but I definitely saw a lot of Spider in that character, and that for me is hard because I mean I talk a lot about Batman, but really in my heart, Spider's my superhero.
The one thing I do really like about Dr. Sleepless is all of the, like, techno-babble and, like, inventions that he has that are very abstract and very far-flung future. Like, they are so different than the technology, quote-unquote, of Transmet that is, like, fantastic technology, where it's, like, a bowel disruptor gun and, like, you know, kind of stranger stuff. Like, the Dr. Sleepless stuff is, like, really techno-babble stuff where it's like, this is not a thing that I can relate to.
There are definitely moments where Warren Ellis kind of crawls up his own asshole.
Yeah.
Which is when I'm least in favor of him. Like, his Ministry of Space is kind of bullshit. Like, I love Warren Ellis.
Yeah.
That is not a good story.
I haven't read that one
and
yet.
he should feel bad for having written it. So, you know, I mean, he's not always the best. So, you know, I could totally see that happening.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely different enough from Transmet in the world, and in Transmet, the city is such a character.
Yeah.
And in Dr. Sleepless, that new city is also such a character that it's kind of cool. One thing I forgot to mention about Transmet that I really liked about it was it reminds me of King City in that, like, the city is such its own character that it is so cool when there's a panel that's just of the city.
I believe I said specifically in the podcast where we talked about it, King City is Transmetropolitan meets Scott Pilgrim.
Yeah,
really,
and it totally is.
It really
like,
is.
The panels where you just see the city in both of those books are so interesting because you actually want to know more about both of those cities.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really enjoyed that. So I forgot to mention that, but that struck me while I was reading Transmet. So I was like, man, I just want more panels of like all the crazy alien hooker background scenes you get where there's like just like all kinds of weird shit going on in the background.
Yeah, as I was flipping through Transmet as we were talking, I happened on one page where there's a guy standing there and he shapeshifts into a girl.
Yeah,
just randomly.
no,
There's no
it's the other way
dialogue.
around.
It's a girl and turns into a guy.
Yeah.
No dialogue, nothing to do with the story, just a thing that happens.
Yeah.
And it's
Just a
like,
thing.
wow, what the fuck was that?
Yeah, there's a great scene where Spider's walking along and he walks past an alley where they're having like cyber robotic sex, where they like are plugging into each other and like getting closer together and their wires are all wrapping around each other. And it's just like weird shit going on in the background and it's cool and interesting. Yeah.
Good.
Cade, did you have anything more you want to say about Dr. Sleepless?
No, I think I'm good.
All right, I'm excited to read the second trade on that one because
I am too.
it's been a long time since that first
if you
trade
have
came out.
both of them, or if you get both of them, I'd like to borrow them.
Yeah.
Because I want to give it another shot.
Yeah, I'll have to read that at some point. It's been a long time since that first trade came out, which I kind of lost track of that series. Okay, the series I'd like to recommend is I kind of went more in the vein of like Spider Jerusalem is a journalist for the people. He's kind of this people's champion, and the series that I want to talk about is another journalistic story,
Right.
and it's DMZ, and it's Vertigo, and it's by Brian Wood, and then it's illustrated by lots of different people, but throughout the series. But the series is really interesting. It takes place in the near future, where there is a demilitarized zone in New York, in the boroughs of New York, specifically in Manhattan, and there's a war, American Civil War, or some kind of conflict that's going on, and this city kind of got trapped in the middle of it. They never really, at the beginning anyway, as much as I've read, I haven't read the entire series. I believe it's finished now with like 70-some issues. But I think I've read into like the 40s, maybe the 50s. And they never really explain to you explicitly what the cause of the Civil War is or why there's a demilitarized zone, which I think adds a lot to the story as to, you can kind of imply it through what the factions are and like how it probably happened, but they never like specifically spell it out.
Is it kind of like Berlin during the Cold War? I've never read this series. I know nothing about it.
No, not really, because it's more like the city is constantly in a state of warfare, where there are people living in the city still, but they're hiding in boarded up buildings because if you go into the streets, snipers will shoot you. And so this journalist intern, he's a photo tech intern, meets up with a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, and they fly into the city together. He got this internship because his dad pulled some strings. His dad's an important politician. That comes up later in the story. And he goes into the city, and their helicopter, as soon as they land, gets attacked, and everybody dies but him. And so he's stuck in the middle of the city, and they're like, we'll get you out. Come meet us. And he essentially just starts doing the job of the journalist that was sent there in his place. They spray paint press on the back of his jacket so he isn't getting shot by snipers all the time, and he and this medic who was a med student kind of team up at the beginning of the story and start to explore the city. And he has these kind of Spider Jerusalem stories where you'll read his text and there'll be pictures that he's taken, and it plays out in a very similar way to like those art panels in Transmet, where he's got the text is in text boxes and they're pictures of the story, and he's kind of like spelling out this report that he's emailed back to his the higher ups. And so it's really interesting because he tells very personal stories about a life on the street of like the gang warfare that's going on in the demilitarized zone, where these gangs aren't really part of the war, but they're fighting, and there's a war going on outside. There's early in the first trade, there's a story about the guys who are in the zoo in New York, the
Bronx Zoo?
No, it's like
The Central Park Zoo?
Yeah, and they're taking care of all the animals because they're members of like Greenpeace or some
or the ASPCA or whatever.
And they're like militarized, but they're there to take care of the animals. So they're like trading bamboo that they're growing with people, in the outlying community in exchange for like some supplies and stuff. And so there's this whole economy and environment that's set up. One of the first stories he writes are these two snipers on the opposite sides of the war have been communicating with, because they're basically out of ammo most of the time because the supply lines to the DMZ are out. So they've been sending notes back and forth to each other, kind of reminiscent of that scene in the remake of Dawn of the Dead, where they're like in separate buildings and they can't really get to each other, but they're, and these two snipers are dating long distance in a war zone, but they're on opposite sides of the battlefield, and it's just kind of like this, and that only takes up a couple, pages, but there are these cool human stories that are going on.
That sounds really cool.
And the art in it, I think, is amazing. It's like pretty gritty and dark, but at the same time, it's very like well illustrated and colored, and the emotion comes across really well, and the action is very fluid, and there's lots of shit exploding, lots of people getting shot at all the time because it's a war zone essentially. They call it the demilitarized zone, but there's lots of combat going on there.
I'll have to check that out.
And I really like Brian Wood a lot, so
I feel like I just read something by him and I can't remember what it was. I think it's Marvel
Saga, right? Isn't that
No,
right?
that's
that's
Bond.
Bond.
Brian K. Bond.
No,
This is not the. This is
Demo.
the-
That's a
I'll
big one
look
that
it up.
Brian,
I mean, it doesn't matter,
Brian
but
Wood is-
One thing to note about Brian Wood, He and I are actually from the same part of Vermont. And, well, I didn't know it at the time, but I met up with him years later in Salt Lake City, Utah, and he signed all the issues of his run on Generation X for me. But another thing to note is before he did DMZ, he actually worked with Warren Ellis as co-writers for Generation X.
Oh, that's awesome.
Okay.
So, yeah. I mean...
It was X-Men #1 that just came out like a couple weeks ago.
Right,
Yeah.
The new all-female team.
Which looks really cool.
I'm a big fan of Brian Wood. I think everything I've read of his... Because he wrote Viking, too, right? Then,
I think he did.
And I really like that a lot.
This is not the first time this has been recommended to me, and I've been meaning to get around to it. So this will.
And I think now that it's done is the perfect time to pick it all
absolutely.
up. And it's all collected. It's from Vertigo. I really enjoy this series. If you like the journalistic aspect of it, and also like getting to see the political aspect of it, because there's a war going on outside, so like it plays into some of the politics. It's not quite the corruption in politics that is in Transmet, but there's a lot of fucked up shit going on.
Right.
So.
All right. Well,
did you want to do a rec?
I'm going to do a quick rec because everybody, I think we've gotten some good Warren Ellis picks, and I really like the DMZ pick. I'm going to talk about Happy, which is Derek Robertson's most recent work with Grant Morrison, which means now he's worked with Warren Ellis and Garth Ennis and Grant Morrison, which I believe qualifies him for some kind of prize. But Happy, the only thing I want to say about Happy is you should go out and read it. It's about a hitman and his imaginary friend, and if that doesn't hook you, then you're really not going to be intrigued by it. But I mean, the fact that it was by Grant Morrison and Derek Robertson is what initially intrigued me, and then I found it's about a hitman and his imaginary friend. So go out and check it out, and it's good, very good. 4 issues. I think it's been collected, so in a trade, and it's Image, so it'll be cheap. So you have no excuse not to get up off your ass right now and go and buy it.
All right,
awesome.
And
so what are we going to do for the next long run?
Yeah.
So I went back and forth a lot about this. There's a lot I want to read, but right now, especially, we touched on this a little bit in Transmet. There's been a lot of talk recently about tropes that are harmful to women in modern media, especially in video games and comic books and stuff, and film. And this is a big issue. And
there's been a lot of talk about strain of kind of toxic misogyny underlying a lot of geek culture.
Absolutely. And we need to get rid of this. And so I thought, what better way to do this than to highlight something that satirizes one of these more toxic stereotypes and does it in an amazingly entertaining and fun way. And that is Empowered by Adam Warren, the 8th volume of which will be released in December. Adam Warren worked on the American adaptation of the Dirty Pair manga. He's a brilliant artist, and he tackles some pretty great shit. And so I think it's largely misunderstood. I think it's if you look at the covers, it's very cheesecakey. It's a mature reader's title. And so it's easy to look at it and be like, oh, this is just more like, bullshit, cheesecake, half-naked women stuff. And I assure you it is not. It is anything but. It is a very, very cutting satire of... It starts off as a very, very cutting satire of the whole damsel in distress trope, which he dismantles very nicely and grows into a really great story about a female superhero and her kind of place in her city and with the fellow superheroes and stuff. And it's...
her relationships, too.
Yeah, and her relation... And it's the thing that got my girlfriend into comics.
Yeah, and Kirby recommended this on the
on
Ladies'
the
Night
Ladies'
episode,
Night,
so I'm pretty
and
sure...
I sat down and read it, I think, last summer. I'd avoided it for a long time because I thought, like, oh, this is just, sexy cheesecake parody, whatever. There's actually a really interesting story behind it.
Yeah, they're really...
It's very well written.
I think because Kirby recommended it, it's probably not going to be a stretch to get her on the next episode of the long run.
Yeah, and I'd love to have her on and talk about it because I think she really... I know she loves it. It's one of her favorite things to read. And I think that it really does, in a very similar way to Bomb Queen, it's making fun of a lot of people that need to be made fun of because they don't understand that tropes, relying on tropes that turn into these kind of more toxic stereotypes, it's weak writing. And Adam Warren is
lazy.
I think it also does a good job of using showing rather than telling, because a lot of times when people are deconstructing sexism or patriarchy or whatever, it's this very like telling, nagging, like here are all the things that are wrong about everything that you like.
Yeah,
and this doesn't do that. Like it deconstructs it by showing through the story why this is messed up or bad or wrong or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
But does it in a lighthearted, amusing, interesting way.
Right, and it's a lot of fun to read, and it is laugh out loud funny a lot of the time. I have a great deal of respect for Adam Warren.
Yeah, the art's great.
The art is great, and he's doing it by himself. I mean, this is a Herculean effort here. So
we'll do the first 7 volumes.
Yeah, we'll do the first 7 volumes.
Right. Well, that's what's out right now. By the time we're going to do the next episode in 3 months, this should be going out in early July. So October will be the next episode of the long run, and then Volume 8 will come out in December.
Yeah.
All right.
So you have 3 months to read.
Yeah, you have plenty of time. There's no. We don't want to hear your fucking excuses. Is really what we're saying. Just read it, okay? Read it. You should be. I mean, if you're listening at this point, there's no reason for you not to listen to every word we say. So just read it, okay?
We're pretty infallible.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Right?
What?
Yeah.
Either one of those two. Pick one.
Well, see, you need to read it so that you can cultivate an appreciation for it, so that we can come on and tell you why your appreciation is stupid and wrong, and we're much smarter than
exactly,
you.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And it would literally
and
take
our
you
interpretation is the correct one.
I mean, even if you put it off for a while, it would take you a week. You could read it in a week. There's no reason not to read it. So just read it.
Joe, maybe they're real slow readers.
Okay, you know what? It's okay. Like I don't want to.
3 months.
I'm not trying to single anybody else here. You have 3 months. Just go out, have some fun.
We don't care if you hate us or disagree with us. Just buy the books we talk about, read them, and listen to our podcast.
Come on.
It's not too much to ask.
Come on. Do you see what DC is doing? They're doing this because people aren't buying comics. You need to go out and buy comics that are DC comics. So
I think you got really scrambled in your audio there.
Did I?
Yeah. Yeah, you sound really weird.
Whoa. What should I say?
I don't know. You sound like a robot. Here,
Where's
the headphones?
Take me to your leader.
Maybe that's a good time to wrap this up.
I guess so. I can't.
Joe, if you want to say something, just lean into my mic.
Human, robot, I don't know.
I think you're back. Anyway.
Okay.
All right. Well.
Next time.
So,
Empowered.
If you like Transmetropolitan, check out one of the things we recommended. If you want to watch or listen to the next episode of The Long Run, read Empowered.
And that'll happen in 3 months, but next episode we'll be back to our regular numbering.
Which we're doing Luthor by Brian Azzarello and Lee Bermejo.
Yes, that sounds correct.
That is correct.
And thanks for joining us.
All right.
See you next time.
Bye.